I mentioned this in my Ghostbusters 2 review. Sequels to a successful franchise are very tricky to pull off. Ghostbusters Afterlife tried to do the impossible. Not only did they have to fight 30 years of waiting time, they had to erase a very bad taste in people's mouths from the 2016 version. That did include some of the original cast, but in a different kind of role. And they also had to overcome one missing piece, a very important member of the cast. Frozen Empire had to overcome something else. The people liked the new characters and accepted them, but they wanted something else. They wanted the key element that makes the Ghostbusters what they really are. A New York utilities company that just happens to clean ghosts rather than clean up garbage. So, is Frozen Empire any good? I'm Meffistoe. Like, share, and subscribe because this is my review of the movie Ghostbusters Frozen Empire. This review will be spoiler-free. A spoiler review version will be available to members of the channel, so become a member and check it out later on. The basic story of the Frozen Empire is as follows. The gang is back in New York and they're fighting ghosts, and of course wreaking havoc as per Ghostbusters style. After a particularly nasty encounter, the mayor demands that Phoebe will not participate in any activity due to the fact that she's a minor. And of course, Ghostbuster activity will be downsized into the minimum. The family has to deal with the fact that they are under a lot of pressure and the threat for them being evicted from the fire station. Troubles begin when a random customer goes into Ray's occult shop to sell a weird orb object. As Ray is examining it, the PKE meter explodes and Ray is worried. All the while, the ghost containment unit back in the station is starting to fail. Winston Zeddemore sends his tech guy to check it out, and the family becomes aware of Winston's research team in a hidden lab. All of this comes to a head when Ray gives the orb to the lab techs, and the trouble begins brewing. And who are you gonna call? Do you know that old saying, I got good news and bad news? Well, let's start with the good news this time. This film was clearly made for the fans of the franchise, and I'm talking about the fans of the first two movies. New York is truly on display here, and like Batman's Gotham and Superman's Metropolis, New York and the Ghostbusters go together. As I'm running these lines, I realize how much I want to visit all these places. The fire station, the library, all of them are places that are in the movie and give you some member berries. But they are not just here to give you a nostalgic moment. They actually serve a purpose. The fire station is a focal point of the story, and the library is a place of knowledge where you find out all about the big baddie. Again, I'm not trying to spoil anything beyond what is in the trailer. Another thing that I think people would love is the amount of gear porn. And what I mean by this is the fact that there's a lot of gear that you can commonly see in a Ghostbusters movie and is used in the film itself quite a bit. There's a lot more usage of the packs, the car, the traps, and all that stuff throughout this movie. Much more that they used in the first and second film. I think it is more to the fact that they had a lot more budget and they can show off these things to keep the action factor on a high to, I can't believe I'm going to say this, but modern audience. Oof, that felt awful. Anyway, if you're into that stuff, whether you're young, old, these are all toys that the actors could play with, and they do it quite a bit. That was all fine and dandy, but here comes the bad news. What made Ghostbusters really work, is actually the comedy. In its basis, Ghostbusters is a comedy horror genre. You can't replace the ad-libs of Bill Murray regardless if he's in the movie or not. So the other actors need to pick up the slack. I thought Paul Rudd can do it. And in Afterlife, he kind of did. But this time around, it felt just flat. Rudd was doing the usual Rudd things, but it was misused and not really funny. I love Paul Rudd, and I love his mannerisms that you get out of him, but they were a bit off for this particular movie. If you know the actor, you'll know what I'm talking about. I would have preferred This Is 40 Paul Rudd to what we got, which was oddly 40-year-old virgin Paul Rudd. Kumail Nanjiani, whatever you think of him, wasn't a bad cast for the role he played, but his comedic moments were a bit ham-fisted into the story. To me, it felt like he was trying to invoke a Louis Tully kind of a character, but only dumber and rather less bewildered. McKenna Grace, who I loved in Afterlife, had a little bit of a character development in this movie and a little more focus on her. But the problem for me is the fact that the story leans quite a lot on the fact that she's a teen angst kind of a thing, and to a longtime fan of the franchise fell a little bit out of place when it comes to Ghostbusters. Same issue I had with Finn Wolfram's character in Afterlife. Too much teen angst just ruins the comedic factor. And speaking of Finn, he was completely useless in this movie. He contributed nothing to the story. His whole shtick was a vehicle to interact with Slimer and trying to create some physical comedy, and that didn't work either. As for the rest of the cast, they were okay, but nothing more than that. You got what you needed out of Murray and Potts. Aykroyd and Hudson actually had a few moments where I kind of liked, but overall it was just okay. And when it comes to Patton Oswalt, I don't like him as a person off screen, but he didn't really ruin anything in this movie for me. For my own sake, I think they could have casted someone else. Maybe in a perfect world, they could have reused the character of Janosch and turned him in from the art guy into a library guy. I mean, Louis Tully was switched from a CPA into a lawyer just to bring him on to Ghostbusters 2. So why not Peter McNichol? Overall, a disappointing movie for me. They tried their hardest to give you that old school Ghostbusters feel, but it felt ham-fisted, out of place, and distorted somehow. It seems like all the elements were there. The mystery, the settings, the cast, the gear, it just couldn't mesh with each other. A point of disappointment for me here is the score. I didn't like it at all. I get that each movie has to be distinct and unique, particularly with the soundtrack and the score, but when you have a franchise, especially like this, that has such an iconic song and score, and you're not using it at all, not even close, especially when you're back in New York after all these years, frankly, it just annoyed me. After recently watching all the films, I seriously cannot recommend you go out and watch this movie in the theaters. If you're a massive fan of the franchise and liked Afterlife, this might be a serviceable movie for you. To me, it wasn't, and I liked Afterlife. It had a lot of good stuff in it, but the characters and the story let me down in the end. A mid at best movie that on a normal circumstance, I would wait for home video, but more likely, I'm gonna wait for a streaming service. I thank you for watching, and remember, hope is a good thing, maybe even the best of things, and no good thing ever dies. I'll see you on the next video.